Welcome to this YSL Excel VBA tutorial. This video gives you an introduction to working with charts in Excel VBA. So the video is really all about the basics of creating, editing and formatting charts, and we'll begin with the basics of creating a new chart and choosing where that chart gets inserted into your workbook. There's a separate chart sheet. We'll then look at various techniques for selecting data for the charts, from very basic static cell selections through to more dynamic things, including if statements to control exactly which data gets inserted into the chart. Once the chart's been created, we'll look at how you can then modify the source data and also choose a different chart type if you don't like the default one. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at how you can control which chart elements get displayed. So that includes things like the chart title and the axis labels and data labels, etc. Then the final part of the video covers a range of different techniques for modifying the appearance of the chart. So that includes using the built-in chart layouts, chart colours and chart styles. And then finally, how you can create and apply your own custom chart templates for a completely customised look and feel for the chart. So it's a fairly basic introduction, but quite a lot to do. Let's get started. Okay, so the starting point for this video is a workbook with a few worksheets worth of data in it. I've just built up a few simple sheets here, a couple with Academy Award information, so Oscar wins for films in 2015 and films in 2016, and another one showing the list of the highest grossing films, so there's the top 50 highest grossing films of all time apparently. I've just done a little bit of consolidation there as well to work out how many films there are in each year and the total and average from the films in that list, and I'll get a link up to download this file as soon as I can on the YSL website, and I'll stick the link in the description below the video if you're watching this on YouTube. Just in case you can't wait that long, and I will try and do that as quickly as possible, this sort of data is fairly easy to get hold of. With a quick bit of googling you can find on Wikipedia most of this information. So there's a list of the Academy Award winning films broken down by year. It's not exactly what I've got, I've slightly changed the arrangement of data in the worksheets, but you could easily just copy and paste this sort of information into a new blank Excel workbook, and the list of highest grossing films is there on Wikipedia there as well, so that's just pretty much a straight copy paste and a little bit of formatting to tidy it up. So depending on what you want to do, if you've got the data already, if you've downloaded it from the YSL website or you've just copied and pasted from Wikipedia, the starting point for us is to head into the Developer tab and the Visual Basic Editor, and we're going to get started by writing some code to create some charts. So we'll need a module, of course, to write some code, so let's just insert a new module in the usual way. And I'm not going to bother renaming the module. It's worthwhile pointing out though that I have renamed pretty much all the worksheets in here, so I've given code names to each sheet. So if you haven't done that already in your own workbooks, if you've copied and pasted the data from Wikipedia, then I've given names to the worksheets like WS Money, WS Menu, etc, etc. So you can change the code name just in the same way you change the names of modules in the Properties window. Anyway, in this module 1 that we've got, the first subroutine we're going to write is going to be called Create Some Charts. The amount of code that you actually need to create a chart is pretty minimal. All you need to do is refer to the charts collection and then apply the add method to it, and that genuinely is all you actually need to do. Now exactly what will happen when you execute this will depend on exactly which cells you've got selected in the worksheet. So I'm just going to restore down my VB editor window and make sure that I'm on a worksheet that's got some data in it. So I've got cell A3 selected in the Awards 2015 sheet. What that means is when I run this code, if I've got a cell selected in a region of data, then what Excel will do is pick the entire region and generate a chart based on that. So it won't actually select the cells, but that's the region of cells it will use to create the chart. So just to prove that, if I click back into the Visual Basic Editor and then just run that subroutine, I will end up with a chart that is showing all of the films from that 2015 Academy Awards list, so everything from American Sniper down to Whiplash. Now of course you can't always rely on the fact that there will always be a valid cell selected to create your chart, so it would make sense to write some code to select the correct cells in the first place. So what we could do in this case is write some code that selects the Awards 2015 sheet and then selects cell A3 and then creates the chart. So that's not too difficult to do, we've done stuff like that many times in previous videos. It just means adding an extra couple of lines of code up at the top of the procedure. So using the code names of the worksheets, if I press Ctrl space on the keyboard, I can quickly find my WS Awards 15 worksheet and say .select, and then say range A3.select. Now it really doesn't matter that I select cell A3 here, it really doesn't. I could select any single cell in that table of data. The key is if I select a cell in there and I press Ctrl A on the keyboard, then the region of cells that get selected, that's what Excel will base the chart on. So having done that, if I just go back to, let's go back to chart 1 in fact, and then if I go back to my VB editor and I run this subroutine again, it will go to the correct worksheet first and then very quickly generate a chart based on that, so I get exactly the same data. Now it's not too difficult here to just modify the name of the worksheet that I select. So if I change that to WS Awards 16, which is the code name for one of the other sheets, and then just do exactly the same thing again, I'll get a new chart, but this time based on data from from the Academy Awards 2016 instead. So you can see I've got everything from Bear Story there to Straight Outta Compton, and that's the list of films in 2016. Now as you can imagine in this workbook, we're going to be generating a lot of charts throughout the course of the video, so it probably makes sense at this point just to write a quick subroutine to help us quickly tidy up. So all I'm going to do is write a subroutine that deletes every single chart from the entire workbook. So to do that, back in the Visual Basic Editor, just to make this easy to find, I'm going to add this one right to the very top of the module. So I'm going to call it sub delete all charts. And all we're going to do in here, in a similar way to the way we created a chart very quickly and easily, if I simply refer to the entire charts collection, I can then apply the delete method to it. And that would attempt to delete every single separate chart sheet that's in the workbook. Now, just as it would occur if you manually deleted a chart from Excel, if I tried to right-click on chart 3, say, and delete it, it warns me that I need to do that, so I'd have to confirm that I wanted to delete it. And rather than having that message pop up for every chart that I want to delete, what I'm going to do instead is turn off those alert messages. So before I attempt to delete the charts, I'm going to say application.displayalerts equals false. And having done that, if I were to run the subroutine right now, I would find that all the charts I've just created have now disappeared. Now it's worth mentioning that if you don't have any charts to be deleted, then trying to run this subroutine again will cause a runtime error, so you can't delete something which isn't actually there, of course. So it might make sense again if I just hit the end button here to add a little bit of error handling, just a kind of really basic error handling. I'm just going to say on error resume next. And that just above the line on which I attempted to delete the charts collection. Now we've created videos that go into error handling in a lot more detail than that. That's one of the things you can't often get away with, just ignoring runtime errors. But in this case, it's perfect. If I can't delete the charts, then they don't exist in the first place, so I don't need to delete them. So I can just happily ignore that line, and now I can happily run this subroutine as many times as I like. Even if I've created a few charts, if I run my create some charts routine a couple of times, and then go back to delete all charts and run that one, it doesn't matter how many times I choose to run that one, it won't throw any runtime errors. Okay, so back to creating some charts. We've seen that when you pick a single cell in a list, that Excel just uses the entire region of data to create the chart. What if you wanted to pick out some specific rows? So let's imagine it was a nice single straightforward block of cells. Let's say I wanted to create a chart based on, I don't know, let's say the first 5 films in a list. So that's everything from cell A3 to include the titles down to cell C8. So if I wanted to do that, I could make sure that I selected that region of cells first. So back into the VB editor again, if I simply change my selection there from A3 to C8, then if I select that range of cells, when I run this subroutine now, I'll get a chart that's based on just those 5 rows. So if you select a single cell, it uses the entire region. If you select a block of cells, then it will use just the selected cells to create the chart. Now what if the arrangement of cells you wanted to base your chart on was slightly more complex? So let's say for instance you wanted to create a chart that didn't include the Oscar nominations, it was just the Oscar wins. So we wanted to select everything from A3 down to A24 and then C3 down to C24 in this particular worksheet. So to make that work, what we could do is if we head back into the Visual Basic Editor, let's just modify the existing subroutine that we've got here rather than just writing another one. So to start with, I could say A3 to A24. Now, what I can then do, in a single set of double quotes, I can write a comma-separated list of cell references. This is perfect as long as you know the range of cell references you want to include. So after a comma, I can then say C3, colon C24, and then if I were to run that subroutine at that point, I should find that I end up with a chart that only includes information about the Oscar wins, not the Oscar nominations. It's just as simple, although slightly more time consuming, to do that for individual rows as well. So if we went back to, let's go to Awards 2015 this time. Let's say I wanted to include information about just the good films from this list, let's say, or the ones that I like, let's put it that way. So I could go back to the VB editor and let's just change the sheet that I'm selecting to Awards 15, and then I'll start by including the column headers. So I'm going to go for A3 to C3 first of all, so that's the first block, A3 to C3, followed by a comma, and then let's go for, first one's going to be Guardians of the Galaxy. That's best film released that year, I reckon. I absolutely adored that film. So let's say A8 to C8, and then let's have another comma, and let's have, what else do we have? Interstellar, I quite enjoyed that one as well, so let's have A11 to C11. And then let's go for another couple of ones. Let's go for the Imitation Game. I actually only saw that recently, but I thought it was great. A16 to C16. I haven't seen The Theory of Everything, but I think that could be quite good as well, but I haven't actually watched it yet. So let's just go with that. So I've got 1 row of titles and then 3 rows of films. So if I've done that and I run the subroutine again, I ought to end up with another chart that just contains information about both columns, of course. Travesty that Guardians didn't win any Oscars, but there we go. And then the 3 rows of data that we selected. So you've got quite a lot of power. As long as you know the cell references, it's relatively straightforward to include just the specific cells you want. Okay, so what if you wanted things to be a little more dynamic than what we've done so far? If I head back to Awards 2015, what if we weren't sure how many rows of data there were in the list, and I only wanted to include, let's say, cell A3 down to the bottom row in column B, so everything from A3 in this case down to B19, but I wouldn't know which cell was at the bottom of column B. So we can use some standard sort of selection tricks. We've covered these in previous videos in the series. But if I wanted to select everything from cell A3, which would be the top left, to cell B3 dot end Excel down, that would form the block of cells that I'd use to create my chart from. So just to demonstrate how that works in practice, let's have a quick go back to our subroutine, create some charts, and I'll go from cell A3. So I'll change this so it says range A3, followed by a comma, and then I'm going to say range B3, it's meant to be 3, beg your pardon, range B3 dot end Excel down. Now I've talked an awful lot in previous videos about various ways to find the end of a list. In fact, there's a recent video, I think it's number 45-ish in the series, about how to find the end of a list. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that right now. So if I've done that, and I just make sure that I haven't got that block of cells selected to start with, just to prove that it is doing what I want, and then run that one again, I'll end up with all the rows in the 2015 worksheet, but only from the first column, so just the nominations column rather than the wins. And just to prove that, there they are. Okay, so what if things were a bit more complicated yet again? Let's say, for instance, this time I didn't know how long the list of films was, but I wanted to include everything from column A and column C, but not column B. That's a little bit more tricky, but still well within the realms of possibility. So let's head back into the VB editor, and this time what we're going to do is use the union method to effectively join together a range of non-contiguous cells to form a single contiguous range. So in front of the word range here, in where I've said range A3, I'm going to start by typing in the word union to refer to the union method, then open some parentheses, and if you haven't used this before, basically all you need to do here is specify up to 30 different ranges of cells that will be joined together into a single range. So the first range that I'm going to specify here is everything from A3 down to the end of the list. So I just need to change B3 here to A3. So I'm just going to close an extra set of parentheses there at the end as well, just to wrap up the union method. And then essentially that little bit of code there refers to everything from A3 down to the end of column A. Now all I need to do is add in another parameter or another argument to the union method that will do the same thing for column C. So while I've got this bit selected, I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, Control C, and then in between those last 2 closed parentheses at the end I can type in a comma and then paste in what I've just copied with Control V, and then change this so it's range C3 to C3.end Excel down. I'll maybe just separate these things out onto different lines just to make this a little more readable. So I'm going to use the continuation character space underscore and another space underscore here, just so that hopefully you can see things a little more clearly. That just shows you which block of cells we're going to select. So having done that, if I run this one more time, I ought to end up with this time the Oscar winners, or the wins column rather than the nominations column, for all the films in that table in 2015. And just to prove that this will work regardless of which worksheet we're selecting, because our worksheets are set up pretty similarly, 2015 and 2016, everything starts and ends in the same place. If I were to go to my VB editor and change this to Awards 16 and run this again, then I get the Oscar winners, or the wins, for 2016 as well. So there you go, there's using the union method to join together lots and lots of disparate ranges of cells. I'm just going to run my delete all charts routine again at this point, just to get rid of a few things, and then think about a couple of other things we could attempt to do. Okay, let's go for one more complicated one. Let's say we wanted to build a chart made out of only those films that have won at least one Oscar, so we wanted to eliminate the rows where the wins column contained a 0. So to make that work, let's head back to the VB editor, and I'm going to maximize the VB editor this time and create a completely new subroutine. It's a slightly more complex routine, this one. So let's create a sub called Create Oscar Winner Chart. And then we're going to start by declaring a few variables to help us loop over a range of cells and then build up the range of cells that's going to form the chart data source. So let's say something like dim chart cells first of all as range, and we'll also have dim film as range, and we'll also have dim films as range. Now, not all of these are absolutely necessary, but it will help us to work out exactly what we're doing when we build up this sequence of code. Next, we'll make sure that we've selected one of our awards worksheets. So I'm just going to give myself a few blank lines just to scroll this up so you can read a bit more clearly what I'm doing. So I'm going to say WS Awards 15.select this time. We can easily change that a bit later on. Now what I'd like to do is set up which range of cells the films range contains. So at this point, all I'm going to do is set the films range equal to cell A4 down to whichever cell is at the end of the list from cell A3. So that'll just give me the range of cells in column A containing films. So to do that, I'm going to say set films equals range A4, which is the first cell containing a film name, comma, range A3, which is the top of the list, dot end XL down, which will take me right down to the very end of it. Once I've done that, I could begin looping over the range of cells by saying for each film in films. So it's just a standard for each loop, the type we've used many times in previous videos. Close the for each loop by saying next film, and then what we're going to do is work out how to build up the range of cells and store it in the chart cells range. I'd like the chart cells range to start by containing just the row of column headers. So I'm going to say, just below where I've said set films equals, I'm going to say set chart cells, chart cells equals, get there eventually, and I'm going to say range A3, comma, range A3, dot end XL to right. I could have easily just said here range A3 to C3 because I know that there are only 3 columns of data in the entire worksheet, but just in case I decide to modify my worksheet later on and include some extra columns, I might want to make sure that that extends all the way across all the columns in that block of cells. So having set that up before I begin looping, inside the loop what I'm going to do now is check what value the cell in column C holds, and as long as that is greater than 0, I want to add that entire row into the chart cells range. So to make that work, we need an if statement. So I'm going to say if film.offset 0, 2 dot value is greater than 0, then give myself a couple of blank lines and then say end if, so I'll write a block if. Again, many videos in this series are using if statements, and we've done this idea of looping over collections of cells in many videos as well, so not going into too much detail about how this works. There's plenty of reference material in this video series. So having got that if statement set up, what I want to do now is, if that is the case, if I'm looking at an Oscar-winning film, which will fortunately exclude things like the 50 Shades of Grey and other ones that aren't particularly good, but the less said about those the better. If that's the case, I'm going to say set chart cells equals union. So I'm going to use the union method again to essentially extend what's already in the chart cells range. So I'm going to make chart cells equal to itself, or a union of itself, and a new range that's going to start with the film cell, so range film, comma, film.end, XL to right. So again, just in case I decide to extend the number of columns in my list later on, excuse me, I just missed one extra close parenthesis. If that's the case, then that will add each row of data for Oscar-winning films to the chart cells range. Now we only need 2 more lines of code to actually create this chart. The first thing to do is select the chart cells that we've built up in the variable. So we can say chart cells.select. You can apply any method to the chart cells variable. It's just a range, so it's like saying range A1.select. You can do anything to that range that you could to a normal range of cells. Then all we need to do is create the chart, and we know how simple that is. We can say charts.add to create the new chart. Okay, so if I just restore down the window at that point and have a quick look to make sure what we'd expect to get from Awards 2015. So we're going to eliminate all the non-Oscar winning films. Sadly, it means we're going to lose Guardians of the Galaxy, but just to get the code working and to prove that it does work, if I were to run that subroutine and go back to the chart that gets created, we'll see that it's only the Oscar winners from that list. And if I switch back to the Awards 2015 sheet, we should be able to see that it has indeed not selected the non-Oscar winners. Just to check that that works for any worksheet, we might as well. We can change this Awards 15 to Awards 16, and then we can run the subroutine again, and we'll end up with a new chart of films that won Oscars in 2016. So again, the non-Oscar winners have been removed. Just checking on Awards 2016, you can see that we've sadly lost things like Ex Machina and The Martian, which is very sad, and Star Wars, of course, as well. But small price to pay to get rid of 50 Shades of Grey. Dreadful, dreadful movie. Also, I've heard, I've not actually watched it, I don't know, I wouldn't waste my time, but apparently it got nominated for an Oscar for the music. It certainly wasn't anything to do with the acting or the directing, so at least that's to be said for it. Anyway, now you've got the opportunity to modify your if statements. You can check for any conditions here, so you could build a list of cells to be selected to generate your chart based on any criteria you can think of. It could be films that have been nominated for more than one Oscar, it could be films that have got the letter X in their name, you could do anything. So as long as you know something about writing if statements and writing different criteria, you can build your chart out of whatever range of cells you like. Okay, just a couple of other quick things to mention about the charts.add method. I'm just going to scroll back up to the top of this module and then run the delete all charts routine again. And then let's have a quick think. I'm going to make a completely new module for this next little section. So I'm going to right click and insert a new module, and then I'm going to create a new subroutine called creating charts and choosing positions. A little slightly longer name than I intended to do, but what we're going to do then is say WS Awards 15, I think, .select, and then I'm going to say range A3 to C19 .select. Just do a really, really quick, simple one. Then I'm going to add a chart, but this time I'd like the chart to appear in a set position. So far all we've done with the chart add method is accepted that it will appear to the left of whichever sheet is currently active on screen when the line of code runs. What we'll do this time is control exactly where the chart goes. This is very similar to how we add in new worksheets and choose their positions. If I say charts.add and then type in a space, you'll see there's a list of 4 optional parameters for the add method of charts. Before, after, count and type. The only ones we're concerned with here are before and after. So before allows you to refer to any sheet, and the sheet that you refer to, the chart will be inserted to the left of that sheet. So without having to select the sheet, I could say, for instance, worksheets menu, or now in my case I'm just going to say WS menu. So if I were to run this subroutine right now, I ought to end up with a new chart sitting to the left of the menu sheet. So I can run that, and that is indeed exactly where the chart goes. Now, although that works to position the chart where we wanted it, the sad side effect of that is the chart doesn't contain any data. So when you choose to position the chart exactly where you want it to go, it loses the ability to base the chart or set its source data based on the range of cells that you'd selected. It's a bit of an irritation, so we've got a couple of ways around that. What we could do is, after we've added the chart, we could set a reference to it and then use one of its methods to set the range of data that should populate it. Alternatively, we could just add the chart wherever it should go and then move it afterwards. So it doesn't really matter which way around we choose to do this, but it's nice to be able to show you how to set the source data of a chart. It's something that we need to show you in this video anyway. So let's assume that we wanted to add the chart first and position it exactly where we wanted it to go. What we can then do is use the active chart property. So if you say active chart, when you create a new chart, it becomes the active one automatically. So if you say active chart dot, there's a method here called set source data. So I say set source data followed by a space, you'll see it has a single compulsory parameter, source as range. So what we need to do at this point is refer to the range of cells on the correct worksheet that we want to use to populate that chart. So I can say WS Awards 15, big one, WS Awards 15 dot range A3 to C19. That means that I don't have to select the worksheet or the range of cells first, so let me just comment those out temporarily. And then if I run this subroutine one more time, we'll see that we get a new chart inserted directly to the left of menu, and then it's populated with the range of cells from the Awards 15 sheet. So that's one way to get around the problem. This does make it slightly more awkward, however, to refer to the more complex ranges of cells that we were looking at earlier on. So if we wanted to set the source data and get a more complex arrangement, it might make more sense to go back to the award sheet, which means then you'd have to remember which chart you just created to go back to that and set its source data, and so on. So it can cause a few more complications. We'll talk about ways to solve that shortly. But it might make more sense, rather than choosing where the chart goes, I'm going to comment out the active chart.set source data line and bring back in the awards and select for the cells, rather than choosing where the where the chart goes when you create it or when you add it. What you can do instead is say afterwards, you could say active chart dot move, and then the move method has got a couple of parameters as well, essentially identical to the parameters for the add method. You can choose the sheet before or after the sheet that your chart will be moved to. So again, if I just say before WS menu, my new chart will be added and then moved to the left of the menu sheet. So if I run that one this time, I will end up with yet another sheet to the left of the menu sheet, but again this time it's populated with the correct range of cells based on the ones that I'd selected. Just as a final couple of neat things you can do with this, if you wanted to move your chart so that it was always either the first or the last sheet, so you didn't want it to be based on the position of any other specific sheet in the workbook, then you could just refer to the sheets collection. So here, rather than saying move before WS menu, I could say move before sheets 1. So the sheets collection refers to any worksheet or chart sheet in the workbook, and they have an index based from 1, so sheets 1 will always refer to the very first sheet at the left hand side of the sheet tabs, whichever that happens to be. So if I do this one this time, if I run this subroutine a few times, I will find that each new chart gets inserted as the very first sheet. If I wanted to flip that around and insert my new chart and move it then to the very end of the sheets, I could say activeChart.move, and then I can use the after parameter. So rather than using the before parameter, which is the first one, I could either just type in a comma to move on to the after parameter, or I could actually explicitly say after : equals to name the parameter. I don't want to insert it after sheets 1, of course. I want to insert it after whichever sheet is has the highest index number. So the easiest way to achieve that is to say insert it after sheets, not 1, but after sheets, sheets.count. So the count property returns the number of sheets in the collection. So this time if I run the subroutine again, I'll find that my new chart gets inserted to the right hand side, and each time I do that it will expand and go to the right of the last sheet. So there's a few quick simple things you can do to control the position. I'm just going to go back to module number 1 at this point and tidy up a little bit by deleting all the charts, and then let's move on and see a couple of other things we can do. The next few things we're going to do in the video are going to rely on being able to refer to the chart that we've just created. Now, one simple way to do that is if you know that the chart becomes the active chart when it gets created, you can simply use active chart. But of course then if you move away from that sheet and select a worksheet, for instance, you lose the ability to refer to it as the active chart. So I'm just going to talk to you really quickly about a couple of other ways to reference a chart. So just a quick referencing charts. And then let's say let me just quickly copy and paste that bit of code there from the previous routine. So go to the award sheet, select range A3 to C19, and then create the chart. So of course you can say, as we've just seen, you can say active chart. That refers to the chart that's just been created. Type in a full stop, you get the list of, or the IntelliSense of methods and properties for the active chart. if you knew what the name of the chart was, you could also refer to it by name. So you say charts, open parentheses and double quotes, and let's imagine it was called chart 1. Of course, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was called chart 1, but the same thing, if you say charts chart 1, you can apply any method and property to it in the same way. So if you've got a chart that belongs to the workbook and is unlikely to be deleted, give it a sensible name and you can reference it like so. You can also give charts code names as well. So in fact, let me just comment out that line briefly. I'm just going to run this subroutine at this point, and I get a new chart who's called chart 30, and it's got a code name of chart 30 as well. But just like with any standard sheet in Excel, you can rename both its tab name, its sheet name, and its code name. So if I go up to the top of the properties window and find the name property, I'm going to call this one CH Oscars. Which one was that? Oscars 15, wasn't it? So let's go for CH Oscars 15, and then I could change its tab name as well, so I can change that in the properties window as well. So I can say, let's call that Awards Chart 15. So that means that I can reference that chart in a couple of ways. I could say Charts Awards Chart 15, and then do things to it like so. But more conveniently, I could also say CH Oscars 15, which is its code name, and then apply methods to it like so. For this video, we're going to be creating charts a lot. So this technique is great as long as you've got a chart that you know is pretty much always going to be there. Give it a sensible fixed name and a fixed code name, and then you can reference those in your code. But in this video, we're going to be having charts that get created and then deleted fairly quickly. So the standard way we're going to reference charts that we create from this point on is using chart variables. So at the top of this subroutine, what I'm going to do is declare a new variable called ch as a chart. And then we're going to use the add method to return the reference to the chart that we've created. If I just type in a space after the add method, you'll see at the end of the parameter list it says it returns an object. So I can return the object that gets returned by the add method and store it in the ch variable. So I can say set ch equals charts.add. And what that means is that subsequently in the rest of this procedure now, I can say ch dot to reference that chart and then do things with it. So there you go, there's a quick little look at various things you can do for referencing charts. So I'm going to say, let's say set source data, and then I can make that equal to a particular range of cells. Now that you know various ways to reference a chart, whether it's a brand new one that you created or one that already existed, we're going to look at a few different things you can do to modify them or edit them. So I'm going to just go back to module number 1 briefly and run my delete all charts routine to get rid of everything, and then back into module 2, and I'm just going to reuse my referencing charts subroutines. Let's just change its name so it's called editing charts instead. I'm just going to get rid of this little set source data method. So the main idea, in order to edit a chart, of course, you need to be able to reference it first, and we've just talked about various different ways you can do that. Once you've got a reference to a chart, there's a whole range of methods and properties you can use to edit it in various different ways. Just before we look in detail at some of these specific methods and properties, it is worthwhile quickly mentioning something called the chart wizard. Now, the chart wizard method, if you're very, very old like I am, you may remember from very old versions of Excel, when you created a chart, there was a little dialog box, a step-by-step wizard that you followed to choose the chart type, the range of data you're going to use, the titles and the axis labels, etc. So you did all that in a simple dialog box to set up like the main options on your chart. And the chart wizard method allows you to do exactly the same thing. So for instance, if I wanted to set the source data, you can see that the chart wizard has a source parameter. They're all optional, the parameters here are optional. And you can change all of these things using dedicated properties and methods as well. You don't have to use the chart wizard to do it. But if I said, let's say, rather than using the set source data method for the chart, I could say chart wizard and then say source equals, and then let's just say something like WS Awards 16 dot range A3 to C10, let's go for. So if I were to run that subroutine now, I'll end up with a new chart that originally did indeed have this range of cells, so it's Awards 15, A3 to C19, but it's now changed by changing the source of the chart wizard to this new range of cells on Awards 16. So just to prove that, that's the first few films from the 2016 sheet. Okay, so you can use the chart wizard to make fairly simple changes. I'm going to ignore the chart wizard from this point on. What we're going to do instead is look at the dedicated properties and methods for editing charts. So let me just quickly delete that line and let's look at a few other useful things we can do. Okay, so I guess the biggest thing you can change about a chart is the chart type that you insert. By default, what we've been getting is a standard clustered column chart, which happens to be the default chart that you get when you first install Excel. But if you wanted to modify that, it's incredibly simple. ch.chart type, and then you can make that property equal to any of the constants in this enumeration. So there's every single chart type you can think of in this list. So let's go for a fancy, maybe a 3D clustered column, or 3D column clustered as it's called there. So having done that, if I were to run this subroutine again, and we'll end up with a slightly fancier, completely useless, I find these. It's very, very difficult to read exactly which value the bars point to, but just to prove that you can change the chart type with a really, really simple property. Depending on what range of data you've selected, so let's just modify this. I'm going to go for A3 to B19, and I'm going to go for, let's say, ch.chartType equals XL 3D Pi Exploded, which sounds like the most exciting chart possible. If I were to run that one this time, again, you've got a completely different chart, which again for me is completely unreadable. That's virtually meaningless based on the data that we've got here. But nonetheless, you can quickly and easily change your chart type just by modifying the chart type property. Let's just change things again a little bit so that we're getting a different range of data. I'm going to go back to selecting just range A3, which will mean that I'll get the entire table of data, the current region for the chart. And that means I don't want to use a pie chart for that. I've got two separate series of data, the Oscar nominations and Oscar wins. So I'm going to choose explicitly the XL column clustered, which is the default chart type anyway. I didn't need to do that. But what I'd like to do is change a few other things, like maybe create a chart title. Now some things are fairly easy to change on charts, like for instance adding a legend to the chart. If you say ch.hasLegend, then you can simply make that property equal to true or false. So when you've got more than one series of data, the legend will give you the colour coding, the little key which indicates which series each colour represents. So if I were to run that one this time, I'll end up with my clustered column chart with a little legend on the right hand side. If I wanted to turn that off, I could just set hasLegend equals false, and that would remove it when the chart gets created. Adding a title is similar actually. If I say ch.hasTitle, I can make that equal to true. But that doesn't automatically assign text to the title necessarily. If I wanted to modify the text of the title, what I then have to do is say ch.chartTitle.text equals, and then assign the exact string of text that I want to appear in the title. So in this case I'm going to go for noms versus wins. I can't be bothered typing out nominations. So currently the chart that I've just created doesn't have the title. If I go back to the code and run this one again, I'll find that this time the chart does have a title. Now if you're using Excel 2013 or later, then there is a slightly easier way to apply those same properties we've just changed, the legend and the title. If I just comment these lines out temporarily, and then just run that subroutine one more time just to show you what we get, we do actually get the legend turned on automatically, but the title doesn't appear. Now if I go back to the VB editor and I change, you might have noticed a few times when I've been saying charts.add, there's another intriguing looking method called add2, inventively titled. Good going there, Microsoft. So add2. Now the add2 method just adds another chart to the collection of charts, but it's got a slightly different parameter list. I don't know if you can see here, it's got before, after and count, but instead of type it's got a parameter called new layout. Now that can be either true or false, and if you set it to true, what the documentation says is that the chart will use the new dynamic layout to add the chart elements. To be brutally honest, I can't tell the slightest bit of difference between using new layout true, new layout false. But one effect that add2 does have, regardless of the new layout property, is if I run this one this time, you will find that you get a chart title automatically created, and it also includes the legend, but in a slightly different position. So the legend will only automatically appear if there is more than one series in the chart. So just to demonstrate what I mean by that, if I go back and change my range to A3 to B19 in this example, and then run this one again with add2, then I'll find that because there's only one data series, it automatically excludes the legend. There's no point in having it if there's only one series, and it sets the title automatically. If I go back to the VB editor again, and I just change that back to charts.add and run that one again, I will see this time that I get the legend added, even though it's completely unnecessary, but I do also get the title here as well. So a couple of slight variations with the add and add to methods. Because add to is only, I believe, introduced in Excel 2013, I'm going to continue with the add method, just in case you're still using Excel 2010 or 2007, so you can still follow along with the video. So charts.add, and I'm going to switch back all these properties again so that everything gets set up the way that I want it. Okay, let's just tidy things up again a little bit by going back to Module 1 and running delete all charts, just to tidy things up, and then let's go back to Module 2 and look at a couple of other things we can modify. Now, we've already looked at adding an overall chart title and changing its text. What if we wanted to do the same thing for the individual axes on our chart? So in the column clustered chart that we're creating, we've got an x-axis, the horizontal axis, and a y-axis, the vertical axis. If you want to assign titles to each of those, then you have to reference each axis individually. So if you say ch dot, you'll find that there's an axes collection. So the axes method allows you to return a reference to a single axis. So you do this using a constant. So for the category axis or the x-axis, you say XL category. And then you can say dot has title. Sadly, the IntelliSense breaks down at this point, unfortunately. But I can say has title equals true. And then I can say ch axes. I should have probably used a little with block here, but I can say ch axes, again, open parentheses, XL category. And then I can say axis title, sorry, beg your pardon, dot axis title. I'll get there eventually. It's awkward when you can't use the IntelliSense to help you out. It shows you how awful my typing actually is. Axis title dot text. So it's essentially the same as we've done for the chart title, and then you can make that equal to whatever you like. So I'm going to change that so it's called something like film name. And then we can do exactly the same sort of thing for the value axis. Rather than write all that out again and waste all that time, I'm just going to copy and paste those two lines, and then I'm going to change the axes that I'm using this time from XL category to XL value, and then again change XL category to XL value, and I'll just change the text of that so that it's called something simple like, let's just say quantity. Alright, so having done that, let's just modify my range of data again. I'm going to go back for just cell A3, so I get the full table of data this time, run that subroutine one more time, and I'll end up with a new chart that's got a film name x-axis, category axis title, and a y-axis or a value axis title there as well. Another potentially useful element we could add to the chart would be data labels at the top of each column, so they'll help the user to read what the value of the column actually is. So if I switch back into the VBA editor, if I wanted to add in a set of data labels for a single series, then the simplest way to do that is to refer to the series collection method of the chart object. So if I say ch.series collection, the series collections are just indexed starting at 1, so if I wanted to refer to the blue columns, that's series collection number 1, and then I can say, sadly the IntelliSense breaks down, but in a similar way to has title, I can say has data labels equals true. And then were I to run that subroutine at this point, I'll get a new chart with data labels, as you can see, just at the top of the blue columns. If I wanted that to be assigned to the second series as well, I could just copy and paste, and then enter the number 2 for the second series, run that one again, and I'll get data labels at the top of both columns. That's all well and good as long as I've only got a small number of series. If I've got lots of series, that gets incredibly tedious. So instead what we could do is loop over the series collection. So I could do that by declaring a new variable, so I could say something like dim s as series, and then later on, if I just comment out my 2 lines that I've just added in down here, I could write another for each loop. So I could say for each s in ch.series collection. I can say next s to close the loop, and then inside there I can simply say s dot. And the nice thing about having declared a variable to hold the series is that we now get the series, the IntelliSense for the series object. So I could just say here has data labels equals true. There's also a slightly different way to do it. You might have just spotted there in the IntelliSense there's an apply data labels method. This is quite nice because it allows you a set of parameters to specify exactly what it is you want your data labels to show. So by default they will show the value, so that's their XL data labels show value, that's the default value that it will display. But you could also make it show a label, or show none, or show a percentage. Some of these are only relevant to things like pie charts and donut charts. So for instance, the show percent and show label and percent would only work for pie charts and donut charts. I'm just going to excuse me, I'm just going to leave it saying show value. So I'm just going to leave that as a default. And then this time if I run the subroutine one more time, I'll assign data labels to all of the series. But this is great because this would work whether I had 2 series or 20. It would apply data labels to every single one. Now we've only done a few very basic things to change the appearance of our chart, but already the code is getting quite long and tedious to write, I have to admit. So there's a quick, simple solution. If you wanted to just assign a few default settings for things that would appear on the chart, there's a set of options available in a chart called Quick Layouts. So if I click onto the chart that I've created and go to the Design tab in the ribbon, the second button along says Quick Layout. If I click on that drop-down list there, it's just a set of preset options to do with things like axis titles and chart titles and data labels and legends and grid lines and some basic background changes as well. So you can see that hovering over each of these gives you a different option. Now you can apply these quick layouts fairly easily in code. So just to show you how that would work, I'm going to go back to the VB editor and I'm going to create a brand new separate subroutine that will demonstrate this. So let's call this sub change chart layout, something along those lines. At this point I'm just going to scroll back up to the previous subroutine and we'll cheat a little bit, we'll copy and paste some code. So let's have a quick look at copying and pasting everything up to the part where we create the new chart. Scrolling back down again, we can paste that in and then we can get rid of the series variable, we don't need that here at all. So we'll just have added in a brand new blank chart at this point. Sorry, not a blank chart, beg your pardon, it will be populated. But we haven't assigned anything like titles and legends and data labels, etc. So what we need to do in order to make that work is say ch.apply layout. So there are 2 parameters to the apply layout method. The first compulsory one is the number of the layout. Now according to Microsoft's documentation, and it still says at the time of recording, Microsoft documentation says that you can assign a number of 1 to 10. There's a little lie there. You can actually, at least in Excel 2013, say numbers 1 through 11. There are actually 11 different layouts. So the documentation still hasn't changed yet. I don't know if that's an oversight or not. So let's just choose a number between 1 and 11. I'm going to go for 8. Now you might have noticed as well that there's a separate chart type parameter here for the apply layout method. So if you hadn't already assigned a chart type, you could assign it here as well. I'm going to stick with our bog standard clustered column chart. So having done that, if I were just to run that subroutine at this point, have a quick look at what I've got, it's made a few modifications without me having to write lots and lots of code to change that. I'd still have to then refer to the axis titles to actually change the text and the chart title to change the text, but at least it saved me a tiny little bit of effort. Now at this point, if you wanted to go through all of the different layouts to work out which was the best one for you to use, it's going to be quite tedious to manually edit that number and then run the subroutine each time. So instead what we could do is loop through the numbers 1 through 11 and then create a new chart and apply that layout to it. So before I do that, I'm going to go back to module number 1 and run the delete all charts routine again to get rid of all the existing charts, then back into module 2 and we'll make a couple of modifications to our change chart layout routine. We'll start by declaring a new variable. I'm going to call mine I as integer. And then instead of just adding one single chart, what I'm going to do is run a loop that says for I equals 1 to 11. Then I'm going to create a new chart, and then I'm going to apply a layout to that chart whose number is equal to I. Then I can say next I, and that will run through to generate 11 new charts. It might be worthwhile, just so we can see which chart layout we've applied, changing the name of the chart or changing the chart's title as well. So we could say, for instance, ch dot has title, and then we could say ch dot, I beg pardon, has title equals true. Sorry, beg pardon, I forgot to assign a value to the property, true, and then we could say ch dot title dot text equals, and then I'm going to say chart layout ampersand I. So that will give us the number of the chart layout. So having done all that, if I just run the subroutine at that point, I ought to end up with, oops, beg pardon, I've completely chose the wrong method there, the wrong property. It's chart title, isn't it, of course? I do apologise. So ch.charttitle.text. Okay, let me just run that one more time, and then we should see at least 11 new charts should appear, and each one should have a title which corresponds to the layout that we've chosen, and each one should be ever so slightly different in terms of its layout. So there we go, that gives you a slightly easier way to pick the one you want. Oh, that one's got a data table look. So there you go, that's how you can print out all the various different chart layouts, so you've got a slightly easier way to choose. I'm just going to go back now to the VB editor and back to module number 1, and I'm going to run the delete all charts routine again just to tidy things up before we go back to module number 2 and have a look at something else we could try. Now, the other major thing that you can do to affect a chart's appearance is to format the individual elements of the chart. So although we've made different things appear on the chart and changed their positions and so on using layouts, we haven't actually formatted any of those items. And this is one of those other topics for charts that I could probably just fill up an entire video of all the various things you could format on a chart, because there's a bewildering number of those things. Let's just quickly create a new subroutine to create a basic chart. So I'm going to say sub, change chart colours, let's say. And then I'm going to just copy and paste a few lines of code from the previous subroutine, the first 4 lines there in fact, and then let's just make sure that we've actually created a chart as well. So I can say set ch equals charts.add, and then if I just run this subroutine at this point to create the chart, just so we've got something to work with, you can see that for every single item on a chart that I can select, there's a format tab, and I can format each individual thing in a huge variety of different ways. So that goes to the background, the grid lines, the axes, and the number formatting, the font formatting. I haven't even got a title on here, but I could format the title and the legend. You get the idea, it gets horrendously tedious. So, just in the same way that there's a set of quick layouts to allow you to turn on lots of various options on the chart in a quick, simple way, there are some quick, easy ways to get formatting of charts done as well. So let's go back to the design tab. There are 2 main things we can do here. There's a change colours option, which gives you a range of different colour schemes you can apply to the chart. So some of these are some more hideous than others. And there are also a set of chart styles. If you look in the chart styles list, these apply a range of both formatting options and layout options at the same time. So you can see that they change the grid lines in some cases and change the legend in some cases as well. So that's a sort of a combination type thing. Let's have a quick look at the change colours option though first. If I just go back to my VB editor, and I'm going to just tidy up my chart. I'm just going to manually delete this one actually in fact. And then back in the VB editor, what I'm going to do is loop through a range of numbers again, just as we did for the layouts. This time the colour schemes, the numbers range from 1 to 26, or at least they do on my machine. That might be different depending on which version of Excel you're working in. But all I'm going to do is say for I equals 1 to 26, then I'm going to create a new chart, and I'm going to set its ch.chartColor, spelt the American way without the U, which I often get wrong, sorry about that. So ch.chartColor equals I. Then I can simply say next I, and that will loop through the range of colours just in the same way that we looped through the range of chart layouts. Once again, it's probably worthwhile just quickly having a title that demonstrates or at least labels what we've actually done. So let's copy and paste those 2 lines from the previous routine, and I'm going to call this chart color, and don't worry, I'll spell it the well the way that Excel would like me to spell it. Let's put it that way. Let's not talk about right and wrong. Okay, so having done that, let's run that subroutine and have a look. We should end up with 26 new charts. Marvellous. And then each one of these, if I have a quick look, should have a different colour scheme. As I say, some somewhat more hideous than others. But again, you can scroll through these and you've got a little label there at the top in the chart title that tells you which colour scheme it is, so it makes it easier for you to pick one from the list. Okay, let me just go back to the VB editor again, and I'm going to go back to module number 1, and I'm going to delete all those charts just to tidy up a bit. And then one of the last things we're going to look at in this video, we're going to have a look at these chart layouts. Sorry, beg your pardon, chart styles, not chart layouts. Now, chart styles are numbered just in the same way that colours and layouts are, so we can use exactly the same sort of technique we've just used to loop through the colours and layouts. So I'm just going to copy and paste my entire change chart colours routine, and then paste it in a couple of lines further down, and then of course we'll need to rename the subroutine, so let's call it change chart styles. Okay, so we'll use the same kind of basic arrangement using the same data again. The thing that we don't want to do here is change the chart colour, so let's change that so it says ch.chartStyle. And again, you can make this equal to the value of the integer variable, the counter variable. We'll add in a title and change the chart title text so it's chart style rather than chart colour this time. And then all we need to do is work out what range of chart styles we're allowed to use. Now, the documentation, again, just like it lied about the layouts, there were 11 rather than just 10, it lies about the chart style numbers as well. The documentation says there are 1 to 48 different chart styles. And indeed, it's quite true, actually. If I up this to 49 and I try to run this one, it's going to crash when it reaches 49. Just to demonstrate that, I'm going to run this one. I'll end up with 49 different charts, but it will crash on the 49th. So the specified dimension is not valid. If I click debug, you can hopefully see that if I hover over the letter I, it will show me that it's 49, so that's the point that it's failed. Okay, so I'm just going to stop that and then go back into module number 1 and of course delete all those charts. I don't want to create that many again. And then go back into module number 2. I'm going to change the number this time to slightly bewildering, 352. Just through experimentation I discovered this. The documentation doesn't say this. I'm going to go to 352. Now, there are indeed 48 original chart styles, but once it reaches 48, there's a big gap, and the numbering picks up at 201, bizarrely. So what I'm going to do is say in here, I'm going to say if I equals 49, then I'm just going to make I equal to 201. So it will change the value of my loop counter, so it will start at 201 at that point and then continue increasing until it reaches 352. And that's the biggest number that I could find in that list. So at this point I'm just going to hit the play button and just cross my fingers that it doesn't all crash, but I ought to end up with quite a significantly large number of charts there eventually, and hopefully I might get a little not responding message just briefly, but eventually I'll get there. Wow, look at all those, that's pretty impressive. Now it's entirely up to you how much time you want to spend picking through all of these, just so you can see which particular chart style you might want to use. It's probably easier to stick with a fairly limited, there's not a huge amount of difference between some of these look incredibly similar. I'm certainly not intending to go through and show you every single one that I've just generated. But there you go, that's how you can list out the various different chart styles, and hopefully you can find one in that list that might look at least a little bit interesting to you, and one that you might actually want to use in the real world. Let me just go back into module number 1 and just tidy all this up one more time. So back into module 1, I'm going to delete all those charts, and just get rid of them all and tidy things up a bit. Then back to module number 2. Okay, so for one last option in this video, as a way to format charts quickly, we're going to look at something called a chart template. Now, chart templates are customized things you create yourself, and they combine a combination of formatting options and layout options and style options, and even chart types as well. But the problem is you have to create them manually first of all. So what we're going to do is create a quick extra subroutine, which is going to create a new chart that we're going to use to create our chart template. So I'm going to say create new chart with template. And then I'm simply going to say dim ch as chart, and then let's just do a little bit of copy paste so we can create a chart with some data in it. I'll copy paste those 2 lines which select the worksheet and cell from the previous subroutine, and then I can say set ch equals charts.add. Okay, so just having done that, I'm going to run that subroutine and I'll get my bog standard basic chart, and then it's a bit of a case of manually formatting this to get it to look the way you want. So in Excel itself, you can do things like turn on various options. So if I go to this little plus symbol at the top right hand corner, I can choose to put on the chart title, for instance, and then I could maybe format that. I could put on some data labels as well. Let's put on some data labels. I could do a bit of formatting, so I'm going to change the format of the chart title so it's got some horrific word art type style. I could change the background colour of the chart. Let's give that some kind of, let's not make it too horrific, let's make it sort of pale greyish, and then let's change the font of the axis labels, or sorry, the category labels at the bottom. You get the idea here, hopefully. I think it's all about just changing the chart to look the way you might want it to look. So we could go a little bit further than that. Let's just maybe change the chart type as well. So let me just give this a default chart type of let's go for one of these 3D columns, shall we say. There we go, 3D cluster column, completely unreadable, but there we go. Super, right, so having done all that, what I'd like to do now is save this, however hideous it looks, and I do apologise for how hideous this looks. I've never had much taste, I suppose, when it comes to colours and so on. That's why I'm more of a programmer than a designer. So let's just right-click somewhere on the background of the chart, and we're going to choose to save this as a template. So if I click Save as Template, it's going to take me away to a specific folder path. It's part of your user profile. So what I could do, just for the moment, I'm going to need to refer to this path later on. So I'm just going to click into the address bar there and just copy that to the clipboard for now. And I'll give this chart template a sensible name. I'll call it Hideous. Why not? If I can spell that properly. Hideous. There we go. Marvellous. And then I'm just going to save that. So having saved it, that chart template is now available for me to apply to any new chart that I create. I didn't have to save it in that particular folder, by the way. You can save your chart templates anywhere else, but it makes more sense to save it in the default location. So let me just right click and remove that chart that I've just mangled, and then go back to the VB editor. And all I'm going to do now is, with the new chart that I create, I'm going to say ch.apply chart template. I'll need to pass in the file name and folder path as a string, so if I type in a set of double quotes there, I'm just going to paste in the path that I've just copied, and then I can tag onto the end of that a backslash, and then the name of the file that I saved was hideous.crtx. Alright, so here's the idea. If I use the F8 key just to step through now, just so you can see that this definitely does create, first of all, the normal bog standard chart. Whenever I want to apply all the formatting options I've just saved, I can apply my chart template, and that will make it look as hideous as it was before. But I can now do that for any new chart that I create. So there you go, there's a whole range of different ways you can change the appearance of your charts. Okay, well that's basically it for this first introductory video on working with charts in Excel VBA. Of course, we haven't covered absolutely everything there is to know yet about charts. That's going to take several more hours to accomplish, but this should just give you a nice introduction. So now you know how to create charts from scratch, you know how to assign a certain data range to them, and you know a few basic things about formatting them and hopefully making them look a little bit prettier than the ones I ended up with at the end of this video. Several more videos to come in this little sort of mini-series, if you like, working with charts in a bit more detail, but thanks for watching this one. See you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the Wisel website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.